Hi there. Welcome back to the Voices and Votes, our special program on the Liang Hui. The Supreme People's Court and Procuratorate delivered their work reports to further illustrate China's determination in expanding the rule of law. Deepening supervisory system reform and establishing supervisory commissions nationwide have become a priority for further strengthening party self-governance and taking the anti-graft campaign to a new level. What are the implications of a further supervisory system reform? What more can be done to institutionalize the anti-graft campaign, and how should we understand the rule of law in the new era? To answer these questions and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by He Jing, attorney in the Angier law firm, and Edward Lehman, managing director of the law firm Lehman, Lee & Shi. That's our topic. This is a dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Hey, gentlemen, I've been doing reports on Liang Hui for years, and I'm so familiar with the catchphrase of Liang Gao Bao Gao, reports by the Supreme People's Court and Supreme People's Procuratorate. That doesn't sound like a tongue twist. However, people raise their eyebrows at the mere mention of the two law enforcing organizations, or the most important part of the judiciary system. What do you think are the most impressive highlights from your reading of the two reports?
When I read the reports, especially about the Supreme Court, I'm actually impressed again by the scale of the work the courts all over China has done. The Supreme Court has done like 80,000 cases. The entire courts around the country has done like 80 million cases. The total number of cases has increased like 50% in the last 5 years. I'm talking about the last 5 years. And they're really present to how busy the courts are doing their job in China. And also the kind of the breadth of the scope of the work the courts have done. If you're looking at what courts have done over the years, have been done lots of things in the anti-graft crimes, sending people to jails, lots of them. And also they issued lots of judicial interpretation on the privacy. They have done the work, lots of work in IP. Like Jordan case was very famous among everything they have done. So when you're looking at that, I'm just really present to how busy our courts are in this 5 years.
Well, quantitatively speaking, there's no doubt they have done a lot to improve the judicial system and to undertake judicial reforms over the past years. But what about the quality of the reform?
I mean, I agree with He Jing. This is a monumental undertaking. So you got 1/5 of humanity that they're responsible for, in essence, the court system here. And then I think that the quality is also reflected as well. Take a look at the death penalty, for example. They have diminished the number of capacity of different kinds of indications that would allow you to meet the threshold of the death penalty, for an example. They brought that into the central government into the Supreme Court, as opposed to being done on a provincial level. So I think that there's real quality that's also going on when you consider the numbers of cases and the types of cases that they're handling. And then they're even jumping ahead with these internet courts and with artificial intelligence being a part of the process. So I mean, it's remarkable when you think
authority of this new generation of the CPC leadership has been fully and firmly established with the anti-graft campaign ever since the 18th National Congress of the Central Committee of the CPC. Now, having said this, the landmark legislative piece this time around will be the approval or deliberation about the national supervision law.
Yes.
In the hope that the national supervisory system or commission could be established pretty soon. Now, what do you think of this a major step?
Yeah, I think this is the National Supervision Commission is probably one of the most profound changes in terms of institutional design in our system for over decades. If you're looking at this, the National Supervision Commission, the idea itself, it actually has already a public history of nearly 100 years. If you're looking
By the way, can you draw a parallel comparison between Hong Kong's ICAC and this National Supervision Commission?
Well, I would rather actually borrow the idea from, I would rather refer to the idea from Sun Yat-sen, our founding father, right, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. That's, he brought up this 5 powers in the old political system: judiciary, legislative, the administrative, and the supervisory power, plus the power of examination. So somehow we fulfilled it, in the mainland China. again, after this nearly 100 years. Now, whether it's really, whether we're going to see something very similar to ICAC, I think that's still part of the implementation. I think, but the idea of the supervision, the whole system, is probably to come up with some more effective mechanism or more formal mechanism to make sure to retain the way the government officials or even the companies, corporations, be using the powers.
Well, horizontally, we do draw inspirations from other judicial systems.
Sure.
Historically, what do you think of the practice of Zhongjiwei, the Central Disciplinary Inspection Commission, and their campaign against corruption? Drew both inspirations, praises, and some kind of criticism because of the alleged abusive behavior of some of the law enforcement personnel throughout the procedure. Now, having said this, do you think the establishment of the National Supervision Ministry or Commission will help improve the image of Zhongjiwei, I mean the Central Disciplinary Inspection Commission?
I do. I mean, I think that with the Central Commission on Inspection and Discipline, I mean, they're going to be co-housed in the same space. I mean, so it's not necessarily a merger. Remember that the National Supervision Commission is going to be at the same level as the Military Commission and the State Council.
Of course.
But it is called the Super Ministry. Come on, what does that mean? Western media would call it Super Ministry.
Right.
Does it mean that the powers of the National Supervision Commission will not be held in check effectively?
No. I mean, you got to understand. I think these are integrating different types of things. I mean, when you look at the Central Commission on Inspection and Discipline, that is primarily at the 88.8 million people that are in the party, or 1 out of 15 people. Okay. So then, when you get the National Supervision Commission, you're looking at government workers and you're looking at non-party members that are participating. But you've got an infrastructure of the Central Commission on Inspection and Discipline. Sort of framework that's already existing, and there's a physicality with the places that they're involved in. There's always a danger, when you look at it from a Western lens, and even under a Western lens, there's always a danger when you have things like this that seem like super ministries, but there has to be a balancing act, and someone has to have the intestinal fortitude to be able to put something like this together in order to try to get a balance here. We're not as developed as the United States as far as the legal system is concerned, or some other jurisdictions. So we've got a larger population, and we've got a second largest economy in the world, so they've got to take some challenges here, and I don't think it's always good to criticize.
And I think this is a step forward to strengthen the power of investigation, the power of prosecution. In any human society, I would say, when you design the system, we got to find a very effective way to looking at the way, like especially the government officials, how they do the job. Now, previously, we probably, I think in China, we allow the Zhongjiwei, the party discipline committee, to do lots of this job, especially when it comes to the government officials. Now, the supervision system is always there, but they're sort of hosted in the same house. But now, I think that when it's elevated in the whole institutional design, I think there's a big intention here in terms of whoever designed the system. They want more of the job that has been traditionally done in the Zhongjiwei system, probably officially done by the Supervision Commission. In that way, the rule of law system probably can be more replaced. For example, exactly, yeah. I think the discussion about like the legal counseling. Previously, in the Zhongjiwei system, you cannot really get a lawyer to be present. No. Now, there's actually lots of debates even now. There's a way to push to allow the people to get legal counseling during the national supervision sort of investigation the process. I think that would be a huge step forward if that's accomplished.
So this becomes the bridge. I mean, just like He Jing said. I mean, I agree with you. This really becomes the bridge in which they can finally get to that. And then, but you also have to look at it of lawyers like He Jing. There's only 300,000. It's like, turns out to 0.03% of the population are lawyers in the country. So we're talking from just the logistics standpoint, to be able to get right to counsel is pretty difficult as it stands.
And at the same time, as a part of the judicial reform, the number of judges have been seriously reduced to increase the responsibilities. Having said this, let me come back to examine how how should we supervise the behavior of the National Supervision Commission? Now, is it the highest, the paramount that it cannot be supervised? Legal experts in China have called for more limits on the Commission's power. The issues, catchphrases in the political vocabulary these days when it comes to supervision is inter-party governance, self-governance. It means in Chinese, 党要管党. China is entirely different from the Western institutions in terms of checks and balances and the independence of judiciary, independence of the media. Therefore, China the Communist Party of China emphasizes overwhelmingly the importance of self-regulation, self-governance. This has caused a lot of controversies and debates outside China and inside. People are not sure about this course of navigation. I mean, this is a very independent course of navigation. You are both legal experts, so I'm afraid you cannot just simplify a comparison between China and the West.
Of course.
Therefore, what are your comments?
You know, I think even in the sort of Western system where you see the traditional type of check and balance system, and in lots of those countries, the corruption, the grafting, all the problems still exist. Actually, in lots of ways, probably very widespread as well. I think for most of the system, people are experimenting or exploring system how to deal with the corruption. And I think in China, this is a step, it's a new step to explore what are the effective ways to deal with this big problem. And of course, there's always that, hey, who should monitor this big authority itself? Now, I think predictably, we probably have to rely on the Communist Party's own system in terms of self-governing system to check how it's going to work. But institution design in the Chinese system is very interesting. You know, we have this NPC, the National People's Congress. If you look at the law, it has a huge power, oversees almost everything. The Supreme Court, the Prosecutor Office, now the Supervision Commission. How that's going to work, I think, again, that's probably going to be a process. There will be lots of debate. And also, I think the policy, the decision makers has to borrow or find some ways to see how it's going to work.
Gentlemen, in the age of globalization, there are many ways to integrate China with the rest of the world in globalizing the economy. And legally, we have to consider very carefully the use of the death penalty. According to the Supreme People's Court, the Chinese courts corrected 39 wrongful convictions involving 78 people over the past 5 years. Still, some would consider the progress as very slow in preventing wrongful convictions. So what do you make of China's bid to prevent the wrong verdict, to minimize the negative impact upon the general public, because we have some tragic stories to share about how bad the wrongful convictions could be. So the death penalty has become a focus of public debates at this moment. Are you a fan of the death penalty? Can we have a brief debate?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that it's really something that they've come forward, and even after in some of these, the persons were executed 20 years ago, and people have come forward, and by at least recognizing, I mean, these are tragedies of a Shakespearean nature. We have them in the West as well. I mean, the state of Illinois had 18 people or something like that they had freed because they looked at new technology, and they said that these people were not. There's no way they could have been at these scenes. So mistakes are made. But so what I'm saying is the first step, identifying that there were problems, even ones they could cover up because there was no reason, I think is remarkable, actually. And so I think it took first of all, there were some lawyers that were working that were brave to be able to pursue that for many, many years, not just the family, but the lawyers in a number of these cases. And that's hard work. I mean, it's not for pay. They do it because they have
are you supportive of the death penalty?
I think the death penalty will probably still have its own value within our current system, given all the culture and the historical reasons. And I do commend the role of the Supreme Court all these years. I think it's actually, the rule has been changed. Supreme Court will always have a second look at the whole case if the death penalty is sentenced. So that actually has a dramatic impact on the situation. I don't expect that China is going to abolish the death penalty, which is still going to cause a lot of controversies. But I'm very confident.
Few people in China would expect the Supreme People's Court to utterly cancel the death penalty, or what you call the capital punishment, instantly. However, the Supreme People's Court has agreed to be very, very careful to review the death penalty that's imposed initially by the local courts. Having said this, let's take a quick look at the online debates that I hosted a couple of days ago about the same topic. Welcome back. You are watching Voices Vote, our special program on Liang Hui. Let's take a closer look at yet another major sensational issue that are being deliberated by People's Deputies of the National People's Congress. A new detention system has been designed to replace the practice of shuangui. Everybody knows the implications of shuangui to ensure the rights of detained suspects. What does that mean for China's anti-graft campaign? He Jin.
I hope that the new change or new reform of the whole detention system can be designed in a way that is more consistent with the rule of law requirements, which means that whoever detained has a right to counsel. And also it's very clear that in how long this person is going to be detained. There's lots of, it's informed. So there are lots of things need to be made available to make it to be really consistent with giving enough protection of human rights. So that's the hope. At the same time, I also recognize the complexity of the prosecution of the corruption-related crimes. It's complicated. The authority might want some kind of a special power to make that work. So in reality, if you're looking at all those anti-corruption crimes, probably there are big pressure on both sides. Even for prosecution side, they are probably under a lot of pressure too. But eventually, as a lawyer, I really believe that whoever is detained, they got to have their rights, the human rights, be fully protected.
Yeah, if you don't have tangible evidence to show that the suspect must be put on the trial, how many hours will it take in the United States, for example, for the detention, and when should they be released and conditionally? In China, I believe I fully understand what He Jing says in terms of the special powers and privileges that the Zhong Jiwei used to enjoy. They are afraid that some of the serious suspects would commit suicide if they were to be released.
Sure, suicide or flee. And I mean, these are very realistic, or tamper with evidence. I mean, so these are very tangible and real. And then there's the idea. Again, when you look at it from a Western lens, even in He Jing and I were talking ahead of time, is it whether to notify the family or not that these people have been detained in the first place. Now, it sounds completely inhumane to say that you wouldn't do that, but maybe because of the family system and the connections and in different and smaller towns. I'm not talking about cities like Beijing with 25 million people, but you talk about different places. These things might be reasonable, and having a detention situation where you don't have access. Now, we're used to it. Remember, when we wrote the Constitution, the amendments, the first 10 amendments, which are called the Bill of Rights, were stuff we forgot. And that was the 4th and the 5th and the 6th Amendment, 6th Amendment right to counsel, 14th Amendment right to due process. And so these are the kind of things you're talking about with having the detention and not being able to have access to outside people. So even in the United States, when we started it, it was like, okay, we've got this, now we have to make some amendments to it. This is a really tough, in the day and age of internet and WeChat and everything else, to get evidence and then looking at somebody and not being able to do it. As long as there's checks and balances within these systems, and remember that there have been, with the National Supervision Commission, there has been Beijing, Zhejiang, and Shanxi have been running a pilot
programs. Yes.
So hopefully that's worked out.
Yeah, I'd rather look at this from a historical perspective. To a lot of extent, if you're looking at the way that the Communist Party has been dealing with the problem inside, even for the last, since 1927, the internal system was quite tough, really. There's a lot of legacy of the system. They're treating the problems inside the party. But I'm certain that it's probably the time for the party to seriously to evolve the kind of system. But I think the establishment of the National Supervision Commission, it's a one serious step to change the system or to reform the system.
What captures the headlines these days when it comes to anti-graft campaign, Edward, is that we have recently started a new campaign against organized crime to ensure that social stability could be protected, that connection networks and protection umbrellas must be abolished and eliminated. Mafia. Protection umbrella, I'm afraid, is the catchphrase to refer to mafia. Interest groups these days are interwoven in terms of their influence. So what do you think of the understatement of such a high-handed campaign?
No, I mean, I think it's good. I mean, remember, mafia isn't a bunch of Italian guys running around with cigars and stuff. I mean, these are people who are doing financial crimes. These are people who are involved in social media issues as well. I mean, a whole broad range of types of activities that is dressed up maybe as business in some way, shape, or form, or Ponzi schemes, or whatever the deal is. And so this is a really brave new world for people to have to try to function in. It's not just roughing people up to get shakedown money to protect the store. But, I mean, of course you have to be able to fight against that. Remember that the ills of society is underscored by the kind of corruption or mafia or crime that goes on within the community. And so that has to be tackled in order to, and like I said, I think with the National People's Commission, this is, it's an ongoing kind of process. This is not going to stop here. It's going to continue. And at this point in time, this makes sense. Will it make sense 20 years from now? Probably not. And so I think that it's a developing situation. And to say that we're here and arrived is not.
Yet another issue that may be related to the abolition of the death penalty or not is that 50 of China's 100 most wanted fugitives suspected of corruption have been brought back since 2015. That's what we call the fox hunting campaign.
Right.
Now, it's noteworthy that 34 of them returned voluntarily and turned themselves in after being persuaded by the Chinese authorities. Whatever resources we have leveraged, but do you think the abolition of the death penalty will be an incentive, will be a driving force for them to come back and to turn themselves in further?
Well, you know, it has. I don't know if you looked at it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I just want to say might be one of the factors.
Mm-hmm.
Changqing being an example.
Yeah.
Right.
Where they said they wouldn't do that in that particular case, and I think, I mean, with the government that they were cooperating with, that was a precondition, right?
I actually would incline to say this success of the fox hunting campaign is probably more of the showing of the strength of the capacity of the Chinese police and the prosecutors. It looks like they've been doing an awesome diplomatic job, you know, with the police, with law enforcement power around the world. So I think ultimately the kind of things that make the difference probably outside China, when the fugitives realize they have no way for them to hide, and they probably figured out it's better for them to come back.
The popular television drama In the Name of People illustrates very well overseas viewers don't have any idea about this. The last question is very much about how to put the government on trial. I mean, since the 18th CPC National Congress in late 2012, there have been a number of judicial reforms, and I believe the impacts of more governmental efforts into public interest litigation will start to gain momentum. What do you think of this most sensitive measure?
Well, I mean, it has gained momentum for sure. I mean, I think there's been quite a few cases that have already begun, and we would call this in a lot of cases in rem jurisdiction. So in rem would be over the thing. I'm talking about in America, for example. So it's about environmental protection in some instances. It's about real property. You know, so it would be property rights, both I guess real property as well as intangible property like intellectual property, these types of things, or you know, something a geographical indication. I mean, just something like that. So I think this is a great, I mean, it's not putting the government on trial. It's saying that we need to look at these things because they belong to the people, in some instances, and or the people meaning the government, or they belong to individuals and property rights, and they've identified property as
such public interest litigation may have drawn inspirations from two movies directed separately by Zhang Yimou and Feng Xiaogang. The first one was Qiuju Goes to Court, and the other, 我不是潘金莲. Don't call me Pan Jinlian. I don't think this is the correct English version. But these two movies did reflect the desire by ordinary folks to go to the court and to urge that justice should be done for government officials on charges of corruption and abuse of power.
I would say that China should definitely take a bigger step this part. They need to allow the prosecutors to have more capability to prosecute like environmental crimes. They should enable and also give more power to NGOs to step into, especially on the environmental related the cases. I think that's an area that China, I think our country needs to do a much better job in the next 5 years.
Right, the role of NGO has been examined very carefully, particularly by the overseas media. What do you think of the complementary role that the government and NGOs should play in supervising the rule of law? Well,
okay, I mean, foreign NGOs have been severely curtailed. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, NGOs that are participating with the international focus under the United Nations and these types of things, actually, with repatriation of criminals, China has become a signatory to a lot of these things. They've hosted a number of events here. And the other thing I just want to point out is that there's some places like Poland and Russia where they actually have joint enforcement of awards, and so we're seeing along the Belt and Road Initiative, at least, that there's some flowering of the laws going outside of China. So it's really interesting. But there's always this sort of mistrust between the two countries. Oh, is you know, China the same as us? Is there enough due process right to lawyers? But again, I think they're on the right pathway, and I think this is the only way forward.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your participation in this very enlightening discussion about the rule of law, and particularly the establishment of the National Supervision Ministry and the National Supervision Law. With that, hopefully, we're going to see a cleaner government to win trust of the general public. I'll see you next time for Voices to Vote, our special program on Liang Hui. Until then, goodbye.